By the way, there is a striking and interesting relationship between gambling and the trap of debt. A kind of relationship that is almost symbiotic. See, if you get used to borrowing, and especially borrowing for consumption, chances are high that with time, you will get trapped in debt. If you get used to gambling for whatever reason, chances are high that with time, you will get addicted to gambling, because gambling is highly addictive. Every time you want to stop, something reminds you that perhaps the next attempt carries your win. And so you keep on trying and trying and trying over and over again. Now, these two concepts, debt and gambling, can each lead to the other. It is possible that one can start with the other and end up struggling with both. Let me give us two scenarios that will help us see this relationship for what it is. Scenario one, someone gets introduced to casual gambling, leisure gambling, where one is gambling just to pass time. And in the beginning, this person is still careful enough to only gamble with money that is extra, to be able to safeguard what is essential and only gamble with what is extra, because it is still leisure gambling. It is still casual gambling. Now, as this person gambles and gambles with time, gambling gets sweeter and sweeter, and they want to try and try again and try again. Now, in the fullness of time, this once so cautious person finds themselves going beyond the extra money and beginning to gamble with money that is essential, beginning to gamble with rent money, beginning to gamble with school fees money, beginning to gamble with food money. Now, let me not even talk about the end effects of gambling on families, and especially the disintegration effects of the same, because they are dire. And especially when you begin to strangle your family of your presence and of finances because you're prioritizing gambling. So this person continues to gamble. A day surely comes when the urge for gambling is at an all-time high, but the pocket is dry. So what do? They find themselves going to borrow to finance gambling. So they begin borrowing. This is a new relationship now. So they're already hooked to gambling, and now they begin to finance gambling using debt. So they borrow and they gamble. They borrow and they gamble. Every time they want to quit gambling, they remember the next slot carries their win. And because they do not have money, they borrow some more. Now, with time, they get trapped in debt. So when the pressure from lenders begin to come on them, when the reality that they've been borrowing begins to show up on them, it begins to stress them. It begins to give them a lot of pressure. Now, when that pressure begins to mount on them, some voices begin to speak to them. And these voices begin to tell them that if you continue gambling, chances are high that very soon you will win a huge amount that you can use to come and clear your debts. And you'll be left with some money, and you can go and open a business and carry on with life. Some interesting voices, they always do occur to so many people who find themselves in that particular cycle. Now, so they keep attempting, and they keep borrowing, and they keep getting trapped in debt, and they keep getting addicted more into gambling. That cycle continues until it is deliberately broken. That is scenario one, where one begins with innocent gambling, gets hooked to the gambling, depletes their financial resources, and finds themselves in debt to finance the gambling. Then they get hooked to debt, they get trapped into debt, and they convince themselves that they need to gamble some more to get money to clear their debts. And so there is a serious vicious cycle here that is so difficult to break. The second scenario is of someone who begins to borrow innocently, perhaps borrowing for consumption, borrowing to buy food, borrowing to finance lifestyle demands. So this person begins to borrow, and they have no clue of the repercussions that awaits them courtesy of their borrowing for consumption. So with time, as they borrow for consumption, and because consumption items are recurrent in nature, they find themselves borrowing every other financial cycle. And so they borrow and get hooked to borrowing. So what happens? In the fullness of time, they get trapped in debt. Pressure from lenders begin to pour on them. They have depleted their resources. They have borrowed so much that what they earn is not enough to pay off the debts that they have. And the debts are growing by the day, courtesy of interest and courtesy of their continued borrowing. So now they're trapped in debt, and there is pressure. Some voices begin to also whisper to them, and something begins to tell them that perhaps if they tried gambling, they could be lucky to win a huge amount of money to come and help them clear their debt mess and leave them with some money, as usual, to open their business and continue doing well. So they try their hand in gambling. And so they attempt gambling. But because they are financially struggling, they have to borrow some more to finance their life and also to finance gambling. So they are digging the hole deeper, and they are also getting hooked to gambling. After a while, gambling begins to become sweet, and they get hooked to it, and they begin to get addicted to it, and it is difficult for them to quit. And every time they want to quit, they convince themselves again that the next slot is their lucky chance. So they do it over and over again. In the meantime, they are borrowing and borrowing again until they get to a level where there is no one else to lend them money. So again, they create a cycle that can only be broken when one becomes deliberate. And that is the interesting relationship between gambling and debt. Gambling can push you into debt, and while in debt, you begin to view gambling as the only panacea, as the only option to get you out of debt. Debt can get to trap you and introduce you to gambling, where you begin to view gambling as the only thing that will get you out of this debt. And before you know it, the same gambling is leading you into more debt as you try to finance it in the hope that it will bring you huge amounts to come and seal your debt pit. See, be cautious. You can do better. And this is By the Way.